to go in and an important diplomat. So, let me do the talking, okay? Wakarimasu. Los Amperes aceite apimas. Okay, I have 4 questions right off the bat. Number 1, why do you have a piece of spaghetti in your mouth? It's supposed to be a piece of straw. Okay, forget about that. Number 2, why are you talking like that? Number 3, how the fuck did you get those subtitles on the screen like that? Number 4, why does every single attack have to have a name, and why do you have to shout that name every time you make the attack?
Dungeons & Dragons draws heavily on Western fantasy and mythology. You can pretty easily see the differences between Western and Eastern fantasy and what it looks like. It's like your typical Tolkien-inspired world versus more of an anime-inspired world. They have different tropes, different atmospheres, different tones, different art styles, etc. And yet, there's always a fascination with bringing the samurai and the ninja into Western fantasy. Within 5th edition, there now exists both of those options. But how do and should they fit in the narrative? Let's examine it. I should say that the monk class in general is probably the outlier of drawing on Western fantasy. The idea of ki or chi is something much more associated with Eastern culture and religion. But with Xanathar's Guide, they added the samurai as an archetype to fighter. The monk is somewhat ambiguous as to what country it's based on, as I think it draws on multiple cultures. The samurai is fairly clear though, and I'd say the shadow monk is more narrowed down. You could nail these two down to either Japan or China, and in modern times, it's much more associated with Japanese culture because of things like Naruto and just anime in general. So how do we make this fit within the narrative? Well, the short answer is, it depends on the campaign. Don't worry, I'm not going to leave it at that. By the end of this video, I hope you have some ideas if you're a DM whose player wants to go anime, or if you're a player that wants to be one of these classes. First things first. Session 0, bitch. You should be talking to your DM or players before the campaign starts anyway. As a DM, you need to set the expectations for the player who wants to be a ninja. You gotta let them know that it's not going to be like Naruto. If you know the rest of your players aren't anime fans, you gotta prepare this player for that. You shouldn't dissuade the player from playing Shadow Monk with whatever multi-class combination like Assassin, but you should tell them that they probably shouldn't show up to the first session with a Hidden Leaf Village headband. You have to keep the player's expectations realistic. If the majority of your world is based on Western fantasy, you need to tell the players that. If you're a player that wants to be a samurai, keep your expectations realistic. Don't expect to be playing in the Meiji era as Himura Kenshin, unless that's what the DM has set up for you, in which case, go full Rurouni Kenshin. That actually sounds fucking awesome, by the way. I'm pretty sure there's a samurai tabletop RPG for that already, though. Anyway, back to the topic at hand. Let's say, for the sake of the argument, that your DM has greenlit your samurai, but it's not really set in much of a Japanese setting. Be mindful of that, and perhaps build your character around that. Maybe you come from a foreign land with a foreign fighting style. That can build a lot of intrigue and have your character make positive waves in the campaign. But please, for the love of God, don't be obnoxious about it to the other players. As a big anime fan myself, one of my biggest pet peeves is an obnoxious anime nerd that can't conform to any situation. Like, do you have to wear those fucking cat ears everywhere? The amount of times I've cringed watching other people cringe at these people at anime conventions is over never mind. I'm getting off topic again. Now, I need to be firm on this point here. If you are the DM and don't want samurai or shadow monks in your game, or even monks in general, then you need to lay down that law at session 0. If you want strictly Western fantasy, that's up to you. If you're the player and the DM says that, you have to respect it. Maybe this isn't the right DM for you. Next, we need to talk about your campaign setting. Are you playing in a module, or is this a homebrew campaign? If it's a module, who cares? There's really no justification or modification needed. The character comes from a faraway land. Done. If your character exists only to play in Waterdeep, does it really matter all that much where you come from? Like, yeah, for backstory lore, sure. Beyond that, it's not something that needs fully developed by a DM. But when it comes to a homebrew campaign setting, then the details suddenly matter. As the DM, you need to decide where this culture lies and who it affects. It can be regional, or it can be racial. It could be neither, if you just wanted to fully integrate it. Or the way of the samurai can be kind of a secret society that has its hands everywhere in the world. Maybe samurai are kind of like Templars, devoted to killing a single kind of enemy in the world. Perhaps all samurai are worshippers of Bahamut, tasked with eliminating chromatic dragons. That gives an interesting multi-class option with Paladin as well. Or maybe your Paladin is a samurai without being a fighter. I honestly don't care too much for the actual mechanics of the archetype. It actually fits really well when you consider the various oaths that paladins take and how that is very similar to the samurai honor code. But PentSage, how do you handle it? I suppose it would help to explain how I handle this kind of stuff. Full disclosure. In the beginning of my world building, I honestly didn't know. I didn't think about it that much. But to be fair, my players are all anime fans. We all go to an anime convention every year. One of my players used a Zanbato on his first character with a katana he was looking for. The second character is a katana wielder. I'm pretty sure no one thought twice about it. But as I was building his master's backstory, it started to dawn on me that I needed to figure out where all this shit came from. He's a human, and I established humans as more inspired by England. I didn't really delineate any specific region or race as Japanese or adjacent. There are pieces of it littered in the human kingdom, like the monastery known as Sudoku Temple. It's a silly name for a very silly monastery, as my players can attest to. Also, I'm writing a book series based in this world, so it's kind of important to delineate something. I finally decided on the Dragonborn nation, Draxon, drawing inspiration from Japan and China. It's not something I have implemented into the campaign yet, but it will blossom in time. It's kind of my fault for not thinking ahead. Also, in the campaign, Bahamut and Tiamat are very important figures in Draxon, so I had to change that up for the book series anyway. I don't think it's particularly wrong to assign real-world races or nationalities to D&D races or nations. I can see some people being like, oh, that's racist. But you know what? It's really not, so shut the fuck up. You're free to make up new cultures and new accents and all that wonderful stuff, but having real-world ties can help make these characters a bit more real to the players, and it's a lot less work. I think most DMs out there draw inspiration from history and real cultures. Matt Mercer definitely does. Don't believe me? Watch everything that Vox Machina did in Marquette in Campaign 1, or look at the Empire in Campaign 2. If you feel weird about it being a racial thing, then make it regional. Maybe a small part of a continent draws inspiration from Japanese culture or Shinto myth or something like that. In my case, I kinda made it both racial and regional. In my world, they just inspired other races and regions to follow suit in small sects. Also, the way my campaign is set up, I divided where the races tend to live, even though there is plenty of coexistence. For example, the Tetra Kingdom is ruled by the Tetra family, who are human, and the kingdom is mostly comprised of humans, although every race lives there. There's even a major city that is devoted to racial diversity. Ursius is the Tiefling Queendom, Haldane is the Dwarven Kingdom, and so on and so forth. Look, if you don't like that, don't do it. Different strokes, you know? If your entire world is one big melting pot, then the whole samurai or ninja thing shouldn't really be an issue in the first place, right? Historically, there are accounts of Western and Eastern soldiers commenting on each other's fighting styles. Trade and interactions happened. The Silk Road is believed to have been used as early as the 2nd century BC. Marco Polo's journey was during medieval times. 5e is by default mostly set with at least early Renaissance technology due to the existence of the rapier, which is a 16th century and later weapon. So it's really not unheard of for some meshing of Western and Eastern cultures. It happened in real life. But again, it's your campaign. You control that flow of how technology progressed and how trade affected cultures. So hopefully this gives you either some validation or some ideas. Just remember that the session zero is so important when you think you might be going outside the norm. And that's general advice, not just if you're a samurai or whatever. So that's it. Thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you all again soon.
このめちゃくちゃはほら、もう毎日わざわざ今日はなんか、言うかわかんないけど、これはもう、fuck am I gonna read this properly? It's so fucking. Why did I do this to myself?